What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes, but I am joined by a certified fantabulous co-worker slash friend, Bryan Toporek. Please follow him on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever other social media thing is out there at B Toporek. That's at BTOPOREK. He covers the NBA for Forbes. He's the co-host of another friend of the podcast, Mort, the podcast, the NBA podcast, the NBA pod. Try to remember that name. Go follow them there. Listen to their stuff. It's always fun. I very much enjoyed your pod where you guys just basically went, it felt like an hour on the DeJounte Murray extension. I appreciate the minutia like that. So yes, Bryan, welcome back. Thank you for coming on. How are you doing while we're all in the dog days of being held hostage by exactly two NBA players?
As someone who has the privilege of covering one of those teams, I'm doing great. Mental health has never been better. Love writing the same story 15 times and finding a slightly different spin. But thank you for having me. You and I actually met in person a couple of weeks ago, which was lovely. So I'm glad to see you again. It's good to see a friendly face.
And now we've met in person, which, by the way, aside, so we're at the BR offices is where we were, where we met up first. There's like this huge mural, and I was the only one who took a picture in the empty seat. No one else took a picture on like this huge mural and like that mock empty seat. I saw no one else doing it, and I was like, I'm gonna do it anyway. So I'm disappointed in you. I would have expected like a cool seated pose.
I took a picture of the random Donovan McNabb poster that was up there. It was like Donovan McNabb and Troy Vincent, I believe, like old school Philadelphia Eagles. That was basically my teenage years. So that was the highlight of the office for me, and all of the incredible food there within like a 2-block radius of said office.
The highlight for me and the BR offices, for listeners who just probably don't know, have like a half court, like basketball court inside. I've not played inside in forever. And so like when I start to shoot like 12 to 15% on jumpers, like, it's molten. And so like after, like, I haven't played inside in years. And so my jumpers were going in more often than they normally do. And so it made me feel really good. But then I actually went and played outside the following weekend, and it was just uglier than it was in the BR offices.
You just saved your game to show off in front of coworkers. I respect it.
My 12 to 15% clip from like the 3-point line. I was very proud of it.
Yeah, it was the Markelle Fultz homage.
So we're going to talk about James Harden and the Sixers just because I have you on and Joel Embiid and everything that gets into it. There's nothing like really new since we last talked about it on this podcast. I guess, you know, there are a few different ways that it could technically end. And by end, I mean like we head into the regular season and James Harden is on the Clippers, James Harden is on the Sixers, or James Harden is on a different team. And I'm just like looking at the regular season specifically, the start of the training camp. How do you expect this to end right now?
I think he's going to be on the Sixers heading into training camp. I think the fat suit is coming out again. I think we've seen this playbook before. I mean, we've seen, like, we know what's coming from both sides. Daryl Morey might be the most stubborn team president, general manager, any front office executive in the league. He gave a radio appearance last week where he outright said, like, I'm either getting a really good player in return or I'm getting the assets that can get me a good player in return down the line for James Harden, or we're not going to trade him. And we've seen James Harden, both in Houston and in Brooklyn, when he wants out, he is going to absolutely dog it. So I think it's just going to get ugly. And I know, Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports reported, he's not going to do the Ben Simmons thing where he like doesn't report or reports late and then, says he has some sort of injury and he can't play. Like, he's going to make life miserable on the Sixers until they trade him.
Now, so is his reporting the worst case scenario, or I guess still being on the team the worst case scenario for the Sixers? Because I get everything you just said, but I'm also looking at this from the perspective of this isn't the James Harden of 3 years ago in Houston, and he has cost himself double-digit millions of dollars in each of the past 2 seasons, looking at what he could have made. And he's arguably cost himself even more than that just because he didn't sign a long-term contract when he had the chance. And now that you are the age that you are, and you're coming off like insofar as there was even something to debate, the postseason discussion is over. You are not a postseason basketball player. You are not. You've had some really good games, but you've had some mostly nondescript to really bad games. Can you really break out? Come in out of shape and loaf through entire games again? Like everyone, was that 2020 or 19, whatever it was, lives in infamy of like going against the Kings and just like it was one of the worst basketball performances anyone's ever seen from a player actively on the floor. Can you actually afford to do that? And I guess if you only have the one destination being the Clippers in mind, okay, sure. But like you're at this point, like you do have a next contract to play for.
Sure. In theory. I mean, that would be the pragmatic, logical approach here, but the pragmatic, logical approach typically doesn't apply to superstars. And I'm guessing his theory is the more miserable I make life on everyone around me, the more likely Daryl Morey eventually just has to cave and be like, get this dude out of here, because now we also have to worry about Joel Embiid, who, is starting to publicly flirt with, maybe I won't end my career in Philly or spend my whole career in Philly.
And I know that's part of this calculus, but if James Harden gets moved, is there a scenario in which they get the assets, let's say assets that they want, but they're unable to flip them for an immediately good player, and the Joel Embiid trade request timeline is accelerated to before this upcoming trade deadline? Or do you very much just see, given what's left on his contract, given the status of everything right now, there's no chance that this comes to a head this year, this season, whatever?
I don't want to say there's no chance. There's always a chance with any superstar to get disgruntled. And if, especially if Harden is miserable and he's in Embiid's ear about how mean the Sixers front office is being to him because they don't want to pay him $200 million, even though no one else wanted to pay him $200 million.
And even though they couldn't legally talk to him about that, right?
Right.
Before free agency.
I mean, that is the Sixers' going story, that they, got hit with a tampering penalty last year. So they didn't want to negotiate before free agency began in fear of another tampering penalty. And Harden and his camp wanted clarity on what they were going to offer. And the opt-out deadline was June 29th, and they couldn't begin negotiating until June 30th. So, it would be funny. It would honestly be funny if it was really just like a miscommunication or a lack of communication that was just not technically possible. And like, what if the Sixers were willing to offer him a 2+1 deal, or, a 3 year, $100 million+ deal, and he just got impatient and was like, no, screw this. I mean, worst case scenario, I feel like they would have likely offered him the same amount of money, maybe with a second-year team option instead of a player option, or like, partially guaranteed instead of fully guaranteed. But you're still technically getting more money in that scenario. So it just felt like, I don't know. I don't know what communication or non-communication was happening then. So maybe the Sixers were sending signals like, hey man, if you opt out of this, we're only offering you like 20 million instead of 35.6. I can't imagine that was the approach.
Yeah.
Because then he's going to come and be pissed off, or he's just going to try to leave. But I think he's mad because he spent 6 months trying to drum up this Houston stuff as leverage against the Sixers. And Houston hires Ime Udoka, and Ime Udoka's like, yeah, I don't think so, guys. We're going to go for Fred VanVleet. Like, it
and
doesn't
max
make
him,
any sense.
no less, for 2 years.
Yeah. And you would think that series of events would be slightly humbling to James Harden, knowing what he gave to that Rockets franchise over the years, knowing his familiarity with the ownership group in particular, knowing that they pivoted away from him and maxed someone else. Maybe that's the wake-up call of like, hey, no one's giving you this money. It's just not going to happen. Like, I haven't looked closely enough at next summer, and it's frankly like too early to realistically project which teams are going to have a ton of cap space next summer, because Who knows what's going to happen with player options and trades and all that stuff between now and then. But like, who's giving him this money next summer either? I think, he opted in. Great. He secured himself $35 million this year. Like, are we sure that he's going to get a 9-figure contract next offseason? So it all goes back to this earlier question of like, what does he have to lose by acting out? I don't know that he has all that much to lose because I don't think the big payday is coming. I think that window has passed unless, if the Clippers do trade for him and he is the catalyst to a deep playoff run, then sure, they'll probably pay to re-sign him and re-sign Kawhi and re-sign Paul George. Everyone's hunky-dory. But like, if he becomes a free agent again and is trying to force his way to another team, cap space is just not a thing as much as it used to be. Like I wrote about this for Forbes and it's going to go live Friday morning. 2019 is really the last time like superstars change teams via free agency.
Yeah.
It was, Kawhi, KD, Jimmy Butler back then, even Kemba was still in that tier back then, like all NBA players. We haven't had a single all NBA player change teams via free agency in the last 4 years combined. And I think that's just a byproduct of, a lot of the changes that we've seen in the news, the last 2 CBAs where, they expanded how much you can give in extensions. It went from 107.5% 2011 to 120%. Now it's up to 140%. So I think teams are realizing we can just extend these guys and trade them later, or even they ask out. And at least we're getting something in return for them instead of losing them as free agents. And now there just aren't that many teams, especially really good teams, that have a ton of cap space. So I just don't know what James Harden's end game here is outside of throw a tantrum and hope it's bad enough that the Sixers trade him to the Clippers at some point. But, going back to your Embiid question, I think he gives it this year. Regardless of what happens with Harden, because the Sixers have, and Morey even said this on the radio, but if you look at all of their offseason moves or lack thereof, it's pretty clear they're angling to be one of the rare teams, one of the rare potential contenders with cap space next summer. So I think much like Damian Lillard with the Blazers this past offseason, I imagine even if Embiid is disgruntled, he says, all right, Daryl Morey, let's see what you're cooking. If come July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, it's just me and Tyrese Maxey and, Harden's gone. Kawhi and Paul George re-signed in LA. Pascal Siakam doesn't come here. OG Anunoby doesn't come here. LeBron and AD are still in LA. All right, then it might be time to ask for the trade. But I think he waits to see what this cap space plan entails.
So this is a weird situation which it feels like no one's even close to a winner, because I just don't see the order of operations that gets the Sixer through some machination of either James Harden nets them a star or they get the assets necessary to get a star. And then even if you get those assets, are you still trading Tyrese Maxey as part of that star package? In which case, whatever you're giving up is James Harden and Tyrese Maxey for that star, which is quite a bit more than just James Harden. And then with Harden, it's, okay, he kind of has nothing to lose, but like, I know he has an agent now. This decision reeked of someone who didn't have an agent by just impulsively opting in, or it's on his agent for not having a better lay of the free agency land, specifically with regards to what Houston was feeling. I do find, to touch on your last point, is, so you wrote about it. First of all, when is the OKC Thunder piece on Forbes dropping? We're all waiting. What's going on here?
The draft is written. I'm waiting. I've got something on draft picks that's got to publish first, which is now scheduled for August 1st. So OKC probably like end of next week, but it's coming.
For anyone who, Brian and I are officially Thunder fans. We're going to board that bandwagon. We are going to start an Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Let us know if you would subscribe to it and make it more popular than both of our podcasts combined.
That's right. The Thunder Buddies.
Yeah, the Thunder Buddies. That's what it's going to. I feel like we can come up with a better name, but
no, it's so good.
Thunder Buddies. All right, there it is. We're going to talk a lot about SGA fashion, how Josh Giddey looks like not just Timothy Chalamet, but I don't know his name. I think it's Ryder Strong from Boy Meets World. Do You ever think about that, or did I just blow your mind? Yeah. Talk a lot about Poku. Yeah, Sean Hunt, exactly. Go look that up if anyone has not checked that out. So
we just
that's
dated
coming.
Ourselves.
We're ready to depart league-wide coverage and rooting for our current team so that we can board the Thunder bandwagon that we've been on for quite some time. But my honeymoon, this is a big detour. My honeymoon with Thunder fans is unfortunately over because I wanted them to do more with their cap space this summer. And that's a no-no among many of them. I get it. I get what the franchise says and what they plan to do. I will not move off my steadfast belief that they were good enough to do more with their cap space this summer than they did. That is not what this podcast is about. You mentioned the Sixers going the cap space route. You just talked about how free agency doesn't matter anymore. And so Jaylen Brown off the board already next summer. Pascal Siakam might be off the board and doesn't really fit in Philly anyway. Do you want Kawhi or Paul George in Philly? What is why should we feel differently about the Sixers prioritizing this flexibility that no longer matters on the free agency market? Why is that a selling point to Joel Embiid?
That is the question that Sixers fans have been wrestling with for the last month. I can't tell you how many people on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever are like, okay, well, who is the guy? Who are you going after? Or is it just you're prioritizing flexibility for, whoever shakes loose? Maybe you have a plan A, plan B, plan C in place, but there are dominoes that will inevitably fall this year, that potentially set the stage for, who knows, asking out, or, someone becomes a free agent unexpectedly. What if Drew Holiday, who said he's going to retire in 2 years, what if he all of a sudden declines his player option next offseason and becomes a free agent? We can bring the process full circle with Drew Holiday coming back to the Sixers to lead them to a championship.
With some Drew Holiday reunion,
Yeah. I think my guess, and this is not reported, this is purely a guess.
Aggregators.
That's right. Come at me. NBA Central.
Hey, look.
I think
you laugh, but I get aggregated all the time with what I write, and I'm writing opinion stuff, and I get aggregated all the time. It's not even reported; it's opinionated stuff.
All right, this is pure opinions that were aggregate away. My guess is OG Anunoby is the target, because I would be very surprised if he's going to sign an extension in Toronto. Maybe he's willing to reunite with Nick Nurse. I know he's pretty complimentary of Nurse after his dismissal in Toronto. I think, Siakam has the Cameroon connection with Embiid, but by all accounts, Siakam and Nick Nurse were not seeing eye to eye by the end of that.
I can't wait for someone to write the tell-all of what actually happened, at least not just last season, but probably the past 2 years specifically.
Yeah, so I don't think it's Siakam. It wouldn't shock me if they're trying to emulate kind of what the Rockets did, where it's, depending on where the cap falls and if they can move off PJ Tucker in a Harden deal, and if they take back any long-term salary, if they're taking back Norman Powell or Terrence Mann or whoever, if they really clear the books, they genuinely could have upward of $60 million in cap space next summer. So, maybe you throw...
Which, by the way, and I know you know this, is not, the way it's been phrased is 2 max slots. That is not what $65+ million gets you anymore. It is, even if we're going 25% maxes at that point, you have max money and then some. That's how this needs to be phrased.
Right. I think maybe it's 2 max slots in that you can then re-sign Tyrese Maxey to a max after you spend all of that cap space, because he's going to be about $13 million instead of he's probably... His new deal, I imagine, starts in the $30 million range, somewhere around there.
You have to max, and you'll eventually be on for the look ahead, which I wanted to start them earlier this year, at the beginning of August. The Sixers are not going to be a team that I'm allowed to do at the beginning because too much will change. I have to sit there and kind of identify. I have some teams I don't think are going to change much, but you're going to make him wait. He's going to, not just he probably would have gotten a max extension, or that's what he wants anyway. Now you have no choice but to give him the max if you make him wait.
Yeah, I would imagine, or close to it, or even maybe give him
unless he has a bad
year
or something. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it makes sense for the Sixers to wait in the sense of if they are going this cap space route, again, his cap holds $13 million. If he gets 30 plus in free agency, okay, you've just manufactured 17, maybe upward of $20 million that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And also, like, if you do trade Harden at some point, we've seen a half season where where Maxey was the lead guard before the Harden trade. But, can we see Tyrese Maxey, in a full season as the lead guard? Like, is he ready to absorb that level of playmaking responsibility? And if not, that should frankly inform your decision making heading into free agency next offseason, because I've like poured through the list of basically all of the possible options. So I named a bunch of them. Like DeMar DeRozan is another one. I want to hold my nose when I say this, but like, it wouldn't totally shock me if Daryl is trying to do a buy low on Miles Bridges, and it doesn't make me feel good. But yeah, maybe you pursue a restricted free agent like Emmanuel Quickley. Do we get a Kentucky reunion with Maxey and Quickley? I imagine Jaden McDaniels is signing an extension with Minnesota and is going to take him off the market, but he would be another option. You've got Mike Conley is going to be a free agent. Like, maybe if you aren't sold on Maxey, get, swing for OG as the big piece, and then like a veteran like Mike Conley as the, your veteran point guard next to Maxey. Like, they're going to have options. It's just, how much confidence do you have in them executing this strategy when, again, we just haven't seen stars change hands in free agency over the past few years? Like, maybe that's a byproduct of, strong teams not having cap space. But, are the Sixers going to prove to be the outliers next year? I think Embiid will give them that opportunity. But if you get to mid-July 2024 and that door is closed and he's, now turning 31 the following March, he's like, is my championship window closed here? And I wrote about this back in May. Like, as soon as the Sixers season was over, basically, I said, whatever happens with James Harden, whether he opts in, opts out, they trade him, whatever, that's going to determine Embiid's future in Philadelphia. And I think there is a real argument that their window is closed. It's possible that they somehow successfully navigate this Harden trade, or this cap space plan works, as intended, and maybe they get a third star with Embiid or Maxey. But I'd say it's probably more likely than not that they just messed up too many times in the Colangelo era. And, Sam Hinkie built up this giant war chest, but that war chest is gone. They have Maxey and they can trade a 2029 first round pick. That's it. Like, they can't get into the bidding for superstars anymore unless you're trading Maxey, in which case, it's going to be Embiid and the star, and that's it. There's just not a ton left here. So, like, I don't think the Sixers are going to seriously entertain moving Embiid, and all the reporting has been they won't entertain it until he asks out. But I think there's an argument that, like, it might be in both parties' best interests to at least consider it, especially next summer, depending on how this cap space plan goes.
Are you ready to talk about some other teams?
Please, God, yes.
Very quickly, because I haven't mentioned on the podcast yet, the Bronny James situation. Shams tweeted that he was successfully treated for a sudden cardiac arrest. He arrived at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, fully conscious, neurologically intact, and stable. Mr. James was cared for promptly by highly trained staff and has been discharged home, where he is resting. Although his workup will be ongoing, we are hopeful for his continued progress and are encouraged by his response, resilience, and his family and community support. That's just excellent news to hear. That was just really so young. And it's anytime an athlete is going to have like a sudden cardiac arrest, just so young and so terrible. So good to know that he's on the mend, and hopefully he's able to make a full recovery that doesn't, mean that he's at risk for anything in the future. I did do a teams no one's talking about enough podcast with S. Barahimi. Go check out basically part 1 on that one. We covered we did the Pelicans, we did the Knicks, the Magic, the Grizzlies, and the Pistons. I wanted to cover the balance of the teams with you because I know that you are also a sicko when it comes to this stuff. And
Right.
I'm curious as to whether you agreed with all of the inclusions of teams no one's really talking about. We will begin with the Charlotte Hornets, which I think is probably just safe to say that no one is really ever talking about the Charlotte Hornets. They were just sold for what did they get sold for? Was it 3.3 billion? What were 2.7? What was the final number?
I didn't even see. I
I'll
don't
look it
know.
up really quickly, but it was
Okay.
a lot of money. It was Michael Jordan's initial investment. It was about 3 billion apparently. So I split the difference like each way. So we'll go to I went 2.7 and 3.3. So the Hornets, I want to just start here. Like, what are just kind of I'm not even sure about the impressions of because it's still ongoing. We don't have a resolution to Kelly Oubre Jr.'s free agency. PJ Washington is still floating around restricted free agency. Miles Bridges signed his qualifying offer, so he will serve the balance of that 10-game suspension after pleading no contest to 30-game suspension. It'll be 10 games left after he was assessed that after pleading no contest to felony domestic violence charges. But now he's playing for his next contract. He's going to be an unrestricted free agency. LaMelo should be healthier. You get Brandon Miller. Cody Martin's going to be healthy. Mark Williams showed a whole bunch towards the end of last season. What do you sort of make of this team's overarching direction right now?
Depressing would be the best word for it. I mean, the Miles Bridges thing is really through no fault of their own. That was just really bad luck because, like 5 days before free agency began last year, it seemed like he was heading for, if not a max extension, pretty close to it. I mean, he had a very good season in 2021-22. Was their leading scorer on almost 50% shooting, averaged 7 rebounds, almost 4 assists per game, almost 1 steal and a block per game, almost 2 threes as well. And that just really, when you're like as bereft of young, high upside talent as the Hornets are, it just really complicated their future. So I don't blame them for, he takes the qualifying offer because they are miles apart on an extension. And I don't blame the Hornets for being reluctant to sign him to a monster extension coming off a year that he didn't play, knowing he's got this 10-game suspension, knowing the severity of the allegations against him. Like, you just simply cannot give him that same level of a deal. So we'll see how he looks next year. I mean, again, I hinted that maybe he's a target, a buy low target for the Sixers or for some other team in free agency that's willing to overlook those charges. Maybe that also informed the Brandon Miller selection over Scoot Henderson, knowing that, hey, negotiations with Miles Bridges are not going well. And like, he is probably going to take his qualifying offer and leave after next year. Because you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think since he took the qualifying offer, he has to consent to a trade since he's now only on a 1-year deal. So it's not like they can even trade him and if they do trade him, I don't think his bird rights go with him. So there's really no incentive for another team to trade for him unless they're going to have cap space next summer anyway. It's not like you can trade for him and then re-sign him to this monster deal. Like you can use non-bird rights, so you can sign him to, he's making $8 million this year. Cool. You can sign him to like $10 million. Like, it's going to be effectively pointless to trade for him. So they have that overhanging them. Brandon Miller, like, you don't want to read too much into summer league, but like was inconsistent, to put it generously, in summer league. And, Scoot, we didn't see a ton of, but when we did, it looked really good. So that is going to be, that's how these things work. Anytime there's a controversial decision at the top of the draft, if the guy you picked is worse than the guy you could have picked, it's not going to reflect well on your franchise. And then the PJ Washington thing, again, it's just like, I don't know. Charlotte just doesn't have a ton of young talent.
Imagine if he signs his qualifying offer. I don't think that's how this ends, but imagine if they have both Bridges and Washington signing their and then it's like, how does that fit into the larger dynamic of the team where both these guys are clearly either playing for their next contract and or next team? And I think, look, there are some what I believe are misconceptions about the Hornets. I would have picked Scoot Henderson, But I'm open-minded about Brandon Miller. He closed Summer League fairly strong. And I think LaMelo is probably skewed towards underrated based off the reaction to his extension, which I do think part of it was with the reporting where everyone said he was guaranteed $260 million. And it's no, that's not how that's actually going to work. If he qualifies, if the All-NBA qualifier works out, they will gladly pay him the Supermax. So he's really good on off. Like, he is transcendent. I know that he shot a lot last year, but he was also injured, and they're like, the team was kind of shifting around him. They weren't ever at full strength, really. I love LaMelo. I love Mark Williams. I think we all just kind of forgot, like, oh, Cody Martin was the consummate gap filler like a year and change ago. I can't quit JT Thor, not a core piece of this team, but like Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, Mark Williams, and then like I think they're going to keep PJ Washington. You're working with something like an actual baseline there. My biggest concern with this team, you outlaid that with Miles Bridges, and are they just sort of like this layover for him at this point this year before he leaves? And how do you juggle that? But like your bite at the getting better apple, a lot better apple, is now Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, and Mark Williams, really, and your own draft picks, because you don't have all this built up equity of other teams as draft picks. And you're also not, let's say Miles Bridges leaves, assuming you keep PJ Washington on any sort of number, or that you have PJ Washington and or Miles Bridges on your roster next summer, you don't have cap space either. And what is cap space going to do for you, as we've already talked about in free agency? So I do worry that they're going to be more of a slow burn than I think people will be ready for, just because all of their best cracks at getting significantly better are going to come through their own draft picks and internal development. And I think, look, the best case outcome for Mark Williams is probably not the second best player on a championship team. You have LaMelo there. Brandon Miller's a rookie. And like, that's sort of the really youthful baseline that you're working with. And maybe that's not an actual big deal, but when you have that first max deal kick in, that first really big extension, which will not be this season, it will be next season, the clock unofficially just starts ticking on, we have to see progress. And I don't know how much progress, if any, next season they're built to make, when what they should be doing is prioritizing Miller, LaMelo, and Mark Williams. And then, like, again, PJ Washington as of now, and then Miles Bridges indefinitely occupy this weird space. I do have faith that Steve Clifford will extract the most amount of defense from this team. They were 6th in points allowed per possession after the trade deadline, or 8th or something. And it was all the stuff that a Steve Clifford team does. So I do like a lot of the pieces that are here. I just have yet to see it formulate a coherent direction, or even this discernible, obvious path forward from where they are right now.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't even want to call them aggressively mediocre. I think that's probably the next team we're going to cover. This is just depressing. It's just like, you have the Gordon Hayward $31.5 million expiring contract. Like, if I was Charlotte, I would be more than willing to take on long-term bad money if such a thing exists. If some team, especially with the second apron, like the full array of penalties kicking in 24-25, if some team is just desperate to dump long-term money, like if they're willing to do that and include a draft pick, by all means, take Gordon Hayward. Great.
Yeah, when's Kristaps trade eligible again?
I mean, Ben Simmons is out there. We'll see. I know it's July, so there's optimism about him, but I don't know. Like, they might have missed that window already with Jordan Poole getting dumped for Chris Paul, but I would imagine some other team. I'm still eyeing Atlanta. Like, I just do not believe. We'll see what happens with the Kongwu and with Sadiq Bey, whether they sign extensions, but like, something has to give in Atlanta. So if they're trying to get off of some long-term money, like, I think that's the Hornets' best path forward, frankly, is, use the Hayward contract to get extra bites at the apple if you can. Maybe take on a rehab project. Like, if you do get Ben Simmons, all jokes aside, like, cool. No one's going to be paying attention to him. Maybe that's actually the best place for him to resuscitate his career.
I actually floated that last year in my mega trade deadline piece, and No Dunks, like the guys on No Dunks, like absolutely destroyed the idea of Ben Simmons in Charlotte.
He wouldn't be thrilled, but
I mean, less pressure there for now, though. I don't really know if I love the fit. I mean, like, him, Brandon Miller, and LaMelo could theoretically work, but yeah, that's where I'm at with the Hornets as well. The next team, and I do, by the way, the other thing with the Hornets is I imagine some sort of like C-suite overhaul is coming. Like
Yeah.
just with new ownership, you're going to see changes in the front office. How long do they want to keep Steve Clifford around? Who I think is a really good coach. Like I think that this is just like, especially when they're in this sort of weird abyss, he's like honestly the perfect coach for it. I'm just curious whether there's going to be more changes on the horizon. And also it could apply to the roster. Is this new, this is not Matt Ishbia taking over a team that's ready to contend in the Suns, but
Right.
is this new regime going to come in and decide like we need to make our splash? And I'm assuming that splash would be like something in the realm of a buy now play, but they're not. If you're putting LaMelo and Brandon Miller off limits, your trade packages are just sort of blah relative to some other teams because of the way that your pick is protected to San Antonio who owns their first round pick now? Is it still San Antonio? Their future first 2000. It's to San Antonio. It's like protected for the next 3 years or 2 years. So like you can't, it's lottery protected, I think in 24 and 25. So you can't guarantee a pick until 27, technically. It's like that just dilutes your best offers, which just gets really awkward. By the way, I'm not advocating they should not be trading their own picks. I want to make that clear. I'm just curious whether that, the new ownership group comes in, and I think who are they led by again? It was he sold it to, was it Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnell? I think it is. So they come in, they take over as majority owners. Do they want to make just sort of this glamorous big move? I honestly don't know. We'll have to wait and find out. But that is part of the ambiguity here as well.
Mm-hmm. New owner. The new owner splash never fails.
Next team, the Chicago Bulls. Mort's Chicago Bulls. We ascribe ownership of the Bulls to Mort. What do you I think everyone wanted them to burn it down this offseason, which is probably what they should have done. Nothing they did, though, was actually unreasonable. I liked the Javon Carter edition. Torrey Craig is going to help them. The Vooch deal is fine. I saw it. I thought it said 3 years and like 80 million at first, not 60. And I was like, oh, like, why did they do that? But I misread it. The Kobe White deal, he had a really good part of last year, developed a lot as a scorer. That deal is good. They stole, Ayo Dosunmu still got like 3 years, 21 million, whatever it is. They did not address really some of their biggest needs, which was additional 3-point volume, additional playmaking, which is not something that Javon Carter really brings. He'll help you more with your 3-point volume than anything. They have been, and I think Bulls are, for the most part, Bills fans are resigned to knowing they're not looking forward to this season. They're kind of confused too. They would have blown it up, which I know we use blow it up, and that's easier said than done. In this case, it's just, you could have gotten value for Zach LaVine. You could have gotten something for DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso. There was a path to starting over. You just chose not to do it while also conveniently ducking the tax. I'm sure that was a pure accident. And so I just look at this team, and so much of what they done, they were worse than middling on offense last year. And this is with 2 years running of DeMar DeRozan just being thermonuclear AF in these high stakes moments. He's going to be 34 when next season ticks off. What does Vooch's learning curve look like? Are we sure that this team, even when getting better on paper, doesn't actually get worse? Because let's just say at minimum, you can't count on DeMar DeRozan to be as good or as lights out on offense as he has been over the past couple of years. And I think you can point to, okay, there's the Kobe White and, development, Ayo Dosunmu as well. And then, of course, Patrick Williams is a swing piece. What type of offensive agency usage, volume, whatever, does he ever get up to given the current makeup of this team? And this is another one where I think their path forward is clearer than Charlotte's, because you still have those. If you start mentioning, oh, you need to trade LaMelo, I think it's too soon for that. I just think he's too good. Yeah. You don't punt on a talent like that. Chicago's path forward is just clearer in the sense of, trade Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, actually start rebuilding. That's where you're at now. And their appetite for doing the exact opposite, I think, is trapped them just to where, they could, I guess, get out of it whenever they want. But I don't understand what's happening in Chicago other than we want to be 7th.
Yeah. Chicago and Toronto are basically the Spider-Man meme right now. What is the long-term plan here?
At least Chicago's not giving away good players for free just yet. That hasn't happened.
But DeMar DeRozan is going to be a free agent next summer. are they going to re-sign him? Is that the plan? And
Does
then
this
trade
all
him
end with
later?
D'Angelo Russell on the Bulls and DeMar DeRozan like in LA? Is that like what's happening here?
I mean, Lonzo Ball has a $21.4 million player option next summer. I imagine he's going to pick that up because he hasn't played basketball in 2 years. Like, who's going to give him?
I'm sorry, what percentage chance do you give the Bulls actually using the disabled player exception that they got for
0.
Lonzo Ball? Yeah, me too.
Negative 50. What? They're like 3 million below the tax line right now. There's no way. I mean, and like, to be fair, why would they? Because whoever you're going to sign at this point is not going to make the difference. Like, you just don't have the high end talent to compete in the East with some of these other teams.
But like, if Detroit at like the trade, I was like, here's Monte Morris, that wouldn't interest you even a little. Like, like you're a team that if you want to be the team you're claiming to be because the Vooch trade was such a home run for your organization, like you should be willing to spend that. It's just they're just like unique combination of incapable because they don't even have a pathway as currently constructed if everything goes right to being excellent. Yeah. Not so long as Lonzo Ball is not going to play, but like they also won't spend like a flagship market organization either. And so it's just like they need to make the tough call. This is very like Wizards-esque. This would feel like is going to be a deterioration here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does feel like their front office is just in like save face mode, as you brought up, with them trying to justify the Vooch trade, which even right now, like remove the 2 picks, one of which became Franz Wagner. Like, I think you would rather just have Wendell Carter Jr. on his contract than you would Vooch on his, even though Vooch's deal is perfectly fine. Like, you could argue Wendell Carter
has yet to play his best basketball and is already better.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I was going to go there. I wasn't sure if we're on the same page. Okay. Yep. Yes. If not better, at least like the trajectories are going the opposite direction. You'd much rather have Wendell Carter's trajectory than Vooch's. Similar to Charlotte in some sense, I feel bad for the Bulls because the Lonzo injury, he was the connective piece. And like that team was really, really good that first half of the season when he was healthy, and then he got hurt and Caruso got hurt and it just all went to hell. And they, that's the problem, is that they've had a season and a half to figure this out and realize like, okay, this Lonzo thing still isn't getting better. They know he's, not likely to play next year as well. So I think, they're clinging to this idea. They're like a poor man's version of the Clippers. We're like, oh, well, if just Kawhi and Paul George would stay healthy, we love our upsides. Like, well, if Lonzo comes back at 24, 25 and we re-signed DeRozan and Patrick Williams has this breakout, like you could sort of maybe see a road where the Bulls get into the top 4, 5, 6 in the East, but it would just take so many things breaking right for them. DeRozan played 74 games last year. LaVine played 77. Vooch played all 82. Patrick Williams played all 82. Io played 80. They were pretty fortunate in the health department last year and still only scuffled their way to 40 and 42. So what happens this year if LaVine misses 15 games, if DeRozan misses 15 games? I agree with you. All of the offseason moves are good and made them better. It's just, I'm not sure what better gets them. I still don't see them making it out. Oh, all right, cool. Maybe they should be in the play-in tournament. Maybe they're top 16. I still don't see them getting out of the first round, though.
I'd be with you. Where do you land on Patrick Williams specifically? And would you expect them to try to lock it, or would you expect them to lock him down on an extension? He is a player whose value is so rooted in concept for much of it. And it just makes it impossible to evaluate not just what the Bulls should or would give him, but what he might get on the open market next summer or the restricted free agent market next summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine that they would sign him to anything other than like a pretty team-friendly structure. Like, I can't imagine they're giving him 4 years, $100 million or anything in that ballpark. Like, sure, if he does like 4 years, 70, I bet they would do that, because at that point, if the cap's going to be 150 million next year, like barely 10% of the cap. Yeah, cool. That's fine. But other than that, I'm guessing they probably try to lowball him. He bets on himself, and we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So I think overall they had a good offseason that really just doesn't move their needle or clarify their future, which is just such a weird space to occupy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the exact right read on them. And, hopefully this season forces their hand one way or the other. But again, we said that about Toronto last year and it didn't. So, you just like what's clear from the outside isn't always clear to the people inside the organization, especially when their jobs are on the line. If you do, have to hit the blow it up button at some point.
The Milwaukee Bucks generating really just no buzz this summer. I think they kept Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez. Lopez's salary is probably inflated, but it's only 2 years, and he just finished runner-up to Defensive Player of the Year. His game has aged exceptionally well. Middleton, they're effectively, when you look at Middleton's deal, when Giannis' deal is currently expired, and the Drew Holiday timeline, they're very much operating on this like 2, maybe 3-year window, and everything they did fits perfectly with that. They made two of the more not under the radar, but probably like two of the best signings of the offseason, regardless of what you think about Jay Crowder. Getting him back at the minimum while knowing that he also has a clearer path to minutes this year is big. And then Malik Beasley, I still believe when he gets going, he could really sling it. And is not a very good facilitator, has the tools to be better on defense than he is. Milwaukee doesn't need him to do any of that stuff. Like if he can get in there and just give them functional 3-point volume on a reasonable percentage, that ends up being huge for them. And I could see him being, we ask ourselves, like, who is the fifth to their most used closing lineup? And like Malik Beasley has a chance. Jay Crowder has a chance. Pat Connaughton has a chance. So to get two guys in the minimum who have a chance and to not feel bad about them having that chance, I think is really big time. And the other thing I think that we're not, and when I say we, I just mean in general, that hasn't been talked about enough. Chris Middleton missed so much time last year, comes back, doesn't look right for most of his appearances, and really kind of turns a corner by the time the playoffs roll around. I know that there's this conception. It feels like he's been around forever. He's 32 and like he's going, you can just, with some of these players, you can't just assume we can't assume at this point that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard play in more than 38 games together. We have years worth of evidence to the contrary. With Chris Middleton, it's just, he's going to be better and more available. Ergo, unless you're really concerned about this Giannis knee procedure or the back stuff he dealt with in the playoffs, they're going to be better. And so I feel like the question I want to throw to you is, even if you don't think that the Bucks on-court product got a lot better, did their relative steadiness in an Eastern Conference that is really going through it when you kind of look at most of the teams around them, like, is that relative steadiness a boom for their championship stock?
I think so. I mean, I guess they have a new coach, so that, they've got the same roster in place, but they'll have a new system, and we have to see what that looks like. I know some people were just like totally out on Mike Budenholzer by the end of his tenure there. Hell, even like halfway through the second round series where they won and then eventually won a title. Like, had they not won that series, Mike Budenholzer probably would have gotten fired 2 years ago. So, there's potential upside in the coaching change. I don't know. I agree with you that the Bucks just feel overlooked, which is weird to say for a team that won 58 games last year and has one of the two best players in the world, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, it's just Giannis got hurt. They lose that first round series, and everyone's just out on the Bucks again, even though we saw them win a championship with this core 2 years ago. I don't get it. Like, I'm not convinced if Giannis doesn't get hurt. Like, if Giannis stays healthy in that first round series,
they win.
I'm not convinced we don't see Milwaukee in the finals.
Yeah. Right. They win. They win that series, certainly, at least.
And then they play the Knicks in the second round. That's, with all due respect, that's probably a sweep or a gentleman's sweep at worst.
With all due respect, they don't even get a game, is what you just said. With all due respect, proceeds to disrespect.
Right. Correct. Drew Holiday is going to lock up Jalen Brunson. Julius Randle is going to shoot 32% from the field with Giannis draped all over him the entire series. Like, just a schematically terrible matchup for the Knicks. And then, Boston, Milwaukee would have been fun, but Boston routinely tried to shoot itself in the foot last year. I imagine that would have happened again. And frankly, like, Milwaukee Denver finals would have been fascinating. I think Milwaukee very easily could have won last year's championship, and Giannis just stayed healthy in the playoffs. So, everyone is like rushing to crown Boston as the new title favorite in the East because of the Porzingis trade. And I'm just still like over here on Milwaukee Island, just like, if they stay healthy, why not them?
Yeah, it's them to me. It's just they would be my pick to
Yeah.
come out of the East right now. I feel like people conflate inactivity or low profile moves as just regression, or they at least conflate, whoa, look at that, with they got better. And I'm talking about Boston, where it's just like
Right.
there should be a litany of concerns there where let's not even get to the cultural impact of trading Marcus Smart. And if you can hear the massive rolling thunder behind me, I apologize. It's just that you gave up playmaking, which you already needed by trading Marcus Smart. And you forfeited some defensive versatility because Porzingis is not going to have the same positional plasticity that Marcus Smart did, and no one else on the roster does. And in his absence, you've kind of committed to a more rigid defensive approach, or you've really amped up the responsibility at both ends for Jaylen Brown and Derek White specifically are the two names that I look at there. And whatever you mentioned, whatever's going on with the Sixers, I think the Knicks are, probably mostly lateral unless you get a bunch of improvement from RJ or Quentin Grimes. I like the DDV acquisition, but it's not someone who's going to crack their closing unit, so they're not materially different. The Cavs, I think, are like, when you're talking about who is most intriguing to come out of the East right now at this moment, knowing where Dame is not, which is he's not in Miami, I kind of feel like Cleveland and Milwaukee are like the teams I gravitate towards the most here.
Yeah, I would put Cleveland in my top 3 of the East right now. Miami will push them out if and when they get Dame. But, I mean, I just don't think you can put the Sixers in that conversation because even if Harden stays, again, what version of Harden are you getting? And yeah, I mean, there's, I know that like Knicks fans are going to be furious. Like, well, we just beat the Cavs. How can you say that? I just think the additions of Strus and Niang really address what they were missing last year. And now you've got another year with this group together that they can build on. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would still have Cleveland behind Boston just because, I mean,
you're a
Boston
hater.
definitely had, well, yeah. Well, I love the Boston Celtics, my favorite team. Boston has the best player in that series. And I think the way they would match up, like Milwaukee, I think presents some matchup challenges for Boston. And I think you could honestly make the case that switching from Smart to Porzingis makes it easier for Milwaukee to defend Boston now. Because
you could play, I think, regardless of whether Boston is kind of going with one big or two bigs. If they're going with two bigs, I would argue they get a lot easier to defend.
Yeah.
Like maybe they can defend Milwaukee a little better, but even, I don't know. I'm with you on that is my point.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't know who's defending Giannis. Like 38-year-old Al Horford's not doing it anymore. Robert Williams, maybe, but can you trust him to stay healthy? Porzingis, no.
No.
Like,
he's probably of the three, he's the least equipped to defend Giannis.
Right. So there's no really good option there. And Middleton, I think, is the big swing piece, as you said, like missed so much time last year. And even when he was back, like guys were driving right at him in ways we hadn't seen that, especially in that playoff series. Like Jimmy Butler was going right at Chris Middleton in ways we had not seen in past years. So if that's just the new version of Chris Middleton, then yeah, it's fair to be a little skeptical of the Bucks' title chances. But if you're thinking, okay, he came off the knee injury, now he's, got a full few months to recover, like maybe he'll get back to something closer to his old self this year. Yeah, I think I'm on Milwaukee being the East favorites right now as well.
Let's talk about their moves are not headlining moves that they made this offseason. But they add Shake Milton to deepen the bench rotation. They keep Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They got rid of Taurean Prince, which I think absolutely matters. They extended Anthony Edwards, I think, and they paid Naz Reid. They bring in Troy Brown, which he doesn't even begin to replace Taurean Prince, quite frankly. But Nah played a bunch of 3 last year. And I think their biggest addition is going to be time and reps. Part of it is, look, they don't have, when you look at their top 4 players, they didn't have a lot of time together because of the cat injury. Now you factor Mike Conley into this, and then also the ill-timed injury of like a Jaden McDaniels, and they've played a whopping 7 games. They're projected starting 5 and closing 5 together through the playoffs and regular season. And so I look at the Timberwolves. The moves they make, again, on paper are marginal. I like Shake Milton. I thought Nah played really well for them, especially in some of those wing minutes. I think they will miss Taurean Prince. I just feel like they've been written off because of how the narrative took hold of their team early last season, what it is surrounding Cat, of course, and then they didn't really help themselves in the playoffs. They put up a real fight against Denver, but just like with the Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson stuff, that took on a life of its own. Jaden McDaniels injuring himself. But you look at that team, and we can focus on a lot of what they didn't do. But like, I was wrong about the D'Angelo Russell trade. I think Mike Conley ended up being great connective tissue for them, and I missed on that. I think I destroyed them not only on this podcast, but also in the BR response that I did to it. And then Anthony Edwards is just that guy. Like, he is tracking towards all NBA bids. And I think if you were to build, like, you have to take this player for the next 5 years to build your team around, there are maybe 3 to 4 to 5 guys at most you take over him right now, maybe a little bit more. So he's in that conversation. And he just, I know what he can do as a disruptor on defense, but his just as a shot maker, he shot like 38% on step back threes. And as a passer, he's come such a long way on offense. Jaden McDaniels improved on offense last year, as did Naz Reid. The data when he plays alongside another big is not good. It's also not enough data to say, oh, it can't work. So his floor game was budding. Ditto for what Jaden McDaniels was able to do, in addition to propping up strong, 3-point clip on his volume. And I just look at this team and I'm like, we need to talk about the Timberwolves, because I don't think that, do you believe in the 3 big setup moving forward? At the price point, I think it's fair to say no, but I also don't think that you can say that we've seen enough to know it definitively does not work. And given the trajectories of Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels, and even sort of Naz Reid, and then just making the nice little, okay, we thought Nah was sort of this throw-in at the trade deadline. Like, no, this worked. And the impact that Mike Conley has on the locker room and the offense, and just having a capable backup point guard in Shake Milton, who, does more for you than Jalen Noel, there's like a chance. And this is with the caveat that I was very high on the Timberwolves leading into last season.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm somehow even higher on them now than I was last summer after what we watched. And I'm just curious as to where you land on these Timberwolves.
I was bullish on them as well last summer. I thought they'd be at least a very good regular season team. I had some questions about their playoff upside, but just figured Gobert would be such a floor raiser. And as you said, Cat only plays 29 games, so you almost just have to throw out last season. I think the 2 big questions for the Timberwolves: one, they have to extend Jaden McDaniels, right? Like, how much do they do it for? But you just
under $25 million per year in his next contract.
Oh, I mean, that's probably like right in that range. I'm guessing slightly under, if they can get him to agree, but they might not be able to. If they try to, if you go much lower than that, he's probably going to say no. Again, I think it comes down to him and his agent looking at the landscape next summer. But heck, like, if the Sixers are having $60 million to throw around and they strike out on all their free agents, they strike out on the top tier guys, Jaden McDaniels is going to look pretty attractive to them. So, I think he will have suitors, and he's young enough that, young teams that have a lot of cap space, like, if the Spurs are projected to have a ton of cap space next summer, like, they should be taking swings on restricted free agents. So,
also, who has shown more ball skills to date, Jaden McDaniels or OG Anunoby? Let's start a discussion.
No, I think it's just the right answer to that question.
If anyone is watching, my power is literally flickering of this monster thunderstorm that is happening around me. So hopefully you can't hear it. I think the Wolves are going to be good, is my point. I don't know if I would ticket them for a top 4 spot in the West, but I think it's very foolish to write them off. And maybe they go belly up to start the year, and we're talking about some massive overhaul situations, mostly involving Cat. But I think they have a strong chance to just be exceptional, to where if you told me they finished like 3rd or 4th in the West, I mean, aside from Denver and Phoenix, I don't think the West is founded around any sort of certainties. And I think even people would argue that Phoenix isn't considered a certainty. And so you you can put the Timberwolves. Yeah, there's the burden of proof. So like, do you want to loop them in with the Warriors and the Lakers and the Clippers if they're healthy? But you kind of have to, I feel like. And I think I'm that much of a believer in one cat, who, by the way, is just like a transcendent offensive player who has his defensive flaws. And I don't think you necessarily should have paired him with Rudy Gobert. He is offensive transcendence. He is a singularity at his position offensively. And then that being that high on Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, being that wrong on my part about the Mike Conley addition, this Wolves team is ready to make some noise. And if they don't, I'll eat crow. And I think the front office is going to eat crow, and there's going to be some heads that will roll before the trade deadline. If we're 20 games into the season or 25, whatever, and they're just sort of like floating around a whole bunch of nothing, maybe they're even playing really poorly. There are going to be some wholesale changes that are made. Honestly, my prediction would be I don't think they need them because I think they're going to be really good.
Yeah, I think the big concern for them is a lot of teams in the West on paper got better this offseason. Phoenix, obviously, the Lakers made very good moves that should make them better. And they are already, after the trade deadline, a much better team than they were prior to the trade deadline. Health, if the Pelicans can stay healthy, if Zion stays healthy in particular, Timberwolves and Pelicans had the same record last year. And that's with Zion playing as sparingly as he did. Dallas also had a very good offseason. So, did they...
OKC is just on the rise.
Yeah, you got Chet coming back. And, even Houston. I mean, I don't know if Houston's going to jump up into, the 45 win range right away. But, they're going to be better. Really, the Trailblazers and the Spurs are probably the only two teams in the West that don't have at least realistic play-in aspirations this year, which means three teams are going to miss out that think they shouldn't, or at least have realistic hope that they shouldn't. Utah probably falls out of that mix at some point just to protect their own draft pick. I think that's the concern from the Timberwolves perspective is did the rest of the West get better around them? And, injuries will inevitably happen, and one or two teams that we think is going to be good will fall down the standings. But, it's tentatively tough for me to see the Timberwolves in, the top 4 or 5, maybe top 6, but I feel like they're probably still a play-in team this year.
I'm going to predict they finish in the top 6. I'm not going to go through the order. I think the only teams I'm prepared to say that are definitively better, or that I would say will be better, are the Warriors, the Suns, the Nuggets, and I might throw the Pelicans. I'm a big believer in the Pelicans. So I'm going to say they finish in the top 6. I don't even know who would the 15 that I would pick. It wouldn't be Dallas. I guess the Lakers deserve to be there. They're just age 39 LeBron, Anthony Davis's health. I honestly just don't know. I guess the Lakers would be my pick. Those are the 6 teams then. And so then I'm leaving off Dallas at that point. I'm leaving Sacramento.
Yeah, I was going to say, hater.
Yeah. I'd probably go Sacramento or LA. I think we'll fall out of that top 6. I'm going to predict that the Timberwolves go in the top 6. I don't feel the least bit remorseful for saying that Dallas or the Clippers won't, to be honest, or Memphis won't, quite frankly. So it's brutal, but I think Minnesota is legit. Before we skedaddle, are there any other teams or something that we didn't touch upon that you really wanted to talk about during these mega interesting active days of NBA fandom?
Sure. Yeah. So I wanted to get your opinion on this because I feel like we've been having, we talked earlier about Harden, and the Lillard thing is still ongoing as well. Do you think it's a problem for the NBA that we're seeing these trade requests where a guy specifically demands to go to one team?
I do. And I understand the both sides-isms of it, where the players should do whatever they want to do. But my issue comes into play when these actual one-team trade requests wind up really dictating the market to where other teams are scared out of bidding altogether. And so it's just what happened with OKC, just going after Paul George anyway, even though everyone knew he wanted the Lakers, or the Raptors going after Kawhi. I don't think teams are as emboldened to make those risks anymore. And that's what sucks about this, because I think it's well within a player's right to request a trade, to try and dissuade teams from trading for them. But if it's now reached a point where because they're doing this, and we think these players wield so much power that even when they have 4 years left on their contract, you're not actually going to fork over value to make a realistic bid at them. Now you're not just dictating where, you're dictating for how much as well. And I think that's really problematic in large part. And again, I understand the player empowerment of it. I can't bring myself to care about that side as much when we're talking about the 5% of the NBA when we're speaking about player empowerment. And two, I think it's more important that teams in these non-glamour markets, however you want to say it, I think it's important that the Thunder, that the Pelicans, that the Raptors, that the Hornets, that these teams view themselves as being able to go out and trade for these players because they know they're not, I mean, no one's going to sign them in for agency anymore, but you're not going to let these preferences dissuade you actually going after them and trying to keep them again, especially when they're under contract. Now, is it different because Damian Lillard is so old and the number on his contract, 4 years, 208 plus million, is borderline prohibitive, where teams might not view that as an asset? That's sort of an interesting wrinkle here. But it even comes back to the Pascal Siakam stuff, where he's on an expiring contract, so it's different. But I want teams who operate outside the lexicon of player X wants to go to the Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, or Heat. And it's really the Lakers, Clippers, or Heat at this point, it feels like. Maybe Celtics you could throw in there, or one of the New York teams. I want those teams to get involved on these sweepstakes. And the fact that it feels like they're not, and maybe the Damian Lillard stuff smacks me in the face with it where he gets sent to New Orleans or something. But just like, I think that's the biggest problem for me. I don't know where you land on that. And by the way, trade requests, I don't want to say they're inherently a good thing, but they do drive interest around a league that has built a lot of the intrigue around player movement. And so there is value in having these trade requests. It's again, when they're so limited is when it feels very problematic.
Yeah, I'm exactly in your camp. I asked because I have a piece going live on Forbes about this tomorrow, where I say it's like kind of a big problem. I would say probably one of the bigger problems in the NBA right now, because, you know, for the teams going through this, like Blazers fans and Sixers fans just want to, you know, pluck their eyeballs out right now, especially Sixers fans having now gone through this twice in the last 3 years. You know, Ben Simmons did not try to dictate his team. In fact, I believe at one point he was like, I will play for any of the other 29 teams, just not the Sixers. So it's slightly different there.
We need those trade requests more often.
I know. But
anywhere but here.
I agree with you. Like having the agents, you know, Dame's agent has come out and said, I'm telling teams not to trade for him. And it's clear that Miami's offer, as currently constructed, is not good enough. Otherwise, Portland would have already said yes. And so they're trying to find a third team or a fourth team for Hero, which makes sense. But I'm with you. Like, I think the happy medium is, yeah, totally. You can request a trade. That's great. I mean, there's something in the CBA that says you can get fined if you publicly address it, even suspended, which I think would be very funny to see. Like, we'll see how serious the NBA gets about this. Like, I don't think they're going to suspend Damian Lillard for this, but we'll see. But I think the problem of I only want to play for this one team. Great. You should have just become a free agent. Like, no one forced Damian Lillard to sign that extension. No one forced James Harden to pick up the player option.
If the report is accurate, he basically forced the Blazers to give him the extension. I don't feel bad for the Blazers about that, but he actively sought it out, at least. And I'm sorry to even interject, but I know where you sort of land on a lot of the morality issues outside of basketball. And I'm curious how you feel when people say, well, like, if this was someone else who is in the workforce, they're going to try and maximize their earning potential and still look for other jobs. I know how I feel about it, where I just think it's insulting to compare what these players are making to, the middle class. But I'm just curious, how do you reckon, like, the devil's advocate argument of, well, why shouldn't players be allowed to do this? And it's kind of just like, one, is the argument just, well, you can't compare the two, or is it just because now it's prohibiting teams from throwing their hats into the ring to actually get these players anyway? That's when it's become problematic.
Yeah, I mean, if NBA players were at will employees that could be fired and, given 2 weeks notice and laid off, then sure, by all means, go search for whatever team you want to go to. But that's not the case. Like, I worry that, especially with these one team trade requests, that these superstars are basically just like negating the value of contracts. And I think it has trickle down effects, that affect front offices and people like other players on their teams. Like, would Portland have traded for Jeremy Grant knowing that Dame was going to ask out? Would they have re-signed Jeremy Grant knowing that Dame was going to ask out 12 hours later? The Sixers right now are in this weird limbo where they're like 10 million under the second apron. They have their full $5 million taxpayer mid-level exception. If they didn't have to worry about what's going to happen with James Harden and how much money are we taking out or taking back and sending out, they could theoretically, like, maybe they sign Kelly Oubre Jr. or Christian Wood to a $5 million contract right now, but because they're in this limbo, they can't do that. So, like, superstars drive the league. I get it. Like, they are, underpaid relative to their production, and I am sympathetic to all of that. But, like, this is the system you agreed to. The CBA dictates the team can trade you. It's like, why is it fair that they could be traded and they can't ask for a trade? Because they agreed to it. If they didn't like the system,
it's right in the name.
Fight for the right to be able to do that. But then I think, like, my bigger concern is just if stars continue to do this one team thing, like, at what point do owners start to get fed up? And, like, do you start running into, are they going to start trying to, like, go after guaranteed contracts? Like, are they going to stop fully guaranteeing all contracts? Is like, well,
and do the players bend over again like they did this past year in negotiation?
Right. But they're like, what's the point? You've got 4 years left on your deal, and you're telling me you want out. You only want to go to this one team. Why am I even signing you to the contract in the first place?
Yeah, and again, I'm never someone who's going to side with necessarily the people who are owning the teams, but this isn't just about the Blazers. It's about this idea that there's a more of a competitive equilibrium in the league where you want a team like the Nuggets to exist. And they were unique because they gave their core time and they never made like the ultra big swing. Aaron Gordon was like the biggest trade acquisition they made. But like, you want teams, like, what if teams start stepping back from that where they don't even want to go after the Aaron Gordons of the world? You would want a team like the Nuggets who's really good to feel emboldened to go after an A+ name if they have the assets, if they feel, or maybe it's an OKC would be a perfect example. If they feel like they're ready to compete, we know that they don't feel that way. And so that's what I take issue with, is because the league at large, you want all these teams to have the belief that they are operating on a somewhat equal playing field, because that's what drives this entire fucking thing. And if you believe that the only path for them to win a title or to compete with the heavyweights is to draft and develop and then win within a very specific window before their own players start to request out because they haven't won, like, it's just, what are we doing here at that point? And that's why I personally take exception to this whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad. When I get flamed tomorrow, I'm going to refer people to this podcast as well, so we can.
I can't wait to retweet that before I forget. I want to blindly retweet it too. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to retweet it first.
You're going to re-exit, I think you mean, or what is on Blue Sky? Re-skeet? You re-skeet it?
Yeah, fuck that. Oh my God. That just made me sad. I don't really want to go into this. Do you think, though, based off what's kind of happened with the new CBA and like these luxury tax aprons in place, and this is sort of in response to the Jaylen Brown Supermax, are we going to reach a point where the standard to give out the Supermax is even higher internally? Because I think we're going to see more situations where the 35th or 40th best player in the NBA qualifies for Supermaxes because of the all NBA eligibility requirements. But it's so, like, these aprons, teams are going to they are prohibitive, especially the second one, but teams are going to act like they're taboo. And so it's, forget these 3-star models. It becomes almost prohibitive to have 2 players on 35% maxes. And so I'm just curious, is that like sort of the next unintended, or maybe it was an intended consequence by the owners of this CBA, where it's, we talk a lot. I do think the middle class is going to get screwed, kind of like what Austin Rivers said. Like, we saw, like, even a mid-level guy like Bruce Brown, he got paid for 1 guaranteed year. They're not like Dylan Brooks getting the long-term deal is just this anomaly. It's a singularity. And so I do think middle-class guys are going to feel the ramifications of this. But like, I also think we're going to start to see like the second tier of stars or whatever you want to call them are going to eventually feel this squeeze. And I'm just curious as to whether you've given that any thought. I didn't intend to ask you. Talk about unintended consequences. You bringing up the CBA made me think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Jaylen Brown was going to be an interesting test case for that. And I understand why Boston, gave him the full bag because of where they are in terms of their championship window. But I'm sure, as you said, especially with this All-NBA, the 65 game requirement, like there are going to be some very funny names that qualify for Supermaxes in future years. And I can't wait to see what those negotiations are like. Because, I don't think it should be automatic. I think maxes in general were handed out to too many guys, which, is just the default expectation. If you're an all-star, all-NBA player, you're a max player. I think guys in recent years, like James Harden's a perfect example. Like, sorry, dude, you're just not a max player anymore. It's just, you used to be, but you're not anymore. Like,
that's the other thing, too, is like, do we see the older stars get the big paydays that they used to under this new structure? James Harden feels like the perfect example where, no, we're not going to pay you that much into your mid-30s anymore because of how much it sort of represses our flexibility underneath these aprons.
Yeah, and like, I'm wondering, I thought DeJounte Murray was an interesting test case because like the new extension rules allowed him to sign for what he did. And, maybe he could have made more in free agency next summer. There's no guarantee of that. Or maybe, Atlanta would have given him more just to re-sign him next summer. But like, at what point is the money just so big that guys are like, you know what? I don't need the full $300 million or next year when it's like $350 million or however much it might be. Like, I'm good with $280. What am I really going to miss that extra $70 million? And, if someone offered me an extra $70 million to do the same amount of work, of course I would take it. But when taking less is going to positively impact your team and its ability to build a championship contender around you. I mean, we saw it like back in the day with, the Tim Duncan Spurs, with the Heatles when LeBron and Bosh signed there. They signed for less than a max even back then. And the money is astronomically higher than it is now. I feel like we are going to reach an inflection point, especially if the cap keeps going up 10% every year. Like, some people are estimating, the money is just going to get so ridiculous at some point that the first team that can successfully talk its stars into taking slightly less than the max, maybe 32% instead of 35, or even 30 instead of 35, I think it's going to be a huge competitive advantage.
And so next summer should be when we get our projected first $70 million player on the books, right? Because Jaylen Brown's final deal is projected, if the cap rises, to be $69 million, I think. And like, we don't know, like his deal could actually be $288 instead of $304 based off the current projections. But if it's going to rise like by the percentage or the scale at which we think it will the next couple of years, I think our first $70 million NBA player should be on the books if he's already projected to be at 69 in the final year of his current deal.
Yeah, let me see. Not only will it be the first $70 million, it'd be $70 million in the fourth year, 71.4 if the cap goes up by a full 10% each of the next 2 years, and then $76 million in the final year.
By the way, and I know people want us to talk about it being a percentage of the cap, and Jaylen Brown's deal will never be worth more than 35% of the cap. I think that's important context, but you can't go about talking about it purely in those terms because every team is spending differently. They're not just spending on, if we had, you can't go over the salary cap. Like if we had that, okay, fine. But because Boston is going to have like a $200 million payroll at some point or whatever, sans taxes, like you have to talk about it differently than, a team that's below the salary cap floor giving out a third, like, you know what I mean? Like that's why the raw dollar and the number of players who are just making that money. So I don't think we're ever going to shift entirely towards, it's, the final year of Jaylen Brown's deal right now, it projects to be worth 33.25% of the cap. And it's
right.
Like, we could talk about that. I just don't think, I think because of, again, how do you frame that with players who are not making maxes And like teams' payrolls in the summers are constantly changing anyway. And so even if you wanted to report it as Jaylen Brown is making X% of Boston's payroll, that news might be outdated within 30 seconds because they decided to sign O'Shea Brissett or something.
Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. And that's why, we're going to keep getting sticker shock every year moving forward. And it's important to put that into perspective. I think like the cap percentage is important to be like, all right, this is what it is this year. That same percentage 2 years ago would have been X, to like kind of give the context of, if you're horrified by how much money this is, well, 2 years ago it would have been this. So I think that is valuable context in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it's still just raw money. And at the end, and like, again, if the cap goes up 10%, next, so 24, 25, and then 25, 26, you're starting at $57.6 million on this 10-year Supermax. And then you go up to 62.2, 66.8, 71.4, 76 flat. Like, that's just, I don't know. What do you even do with that amount of money? I have no idea. Buy some Bored Apes. Create more NFTs.
Oh, please don't. That's terrible advice.
That's all you can do.
And look, I don't want the money to go to the owners. I'm just saying, like, it's natural to get sticker shock in these situations. I agree with you that we're going to reach a point where players might decide, we don't always see billionaires operate this way, but the players, because like so much of their legacy is tied to winning, they're just be like, well, if I make 65 instead of 75, like I could live with that. Like, yeah, we're absolutely going to reach that point.
Yeah, I'm curious when and who the first team is that gets their team stars to buy into that, because I think that team's just going to be set up so much better than these teams that are handing out these $300+ million contracts to guys who like probably shouldn't get that much money, but they just don't have any other choice.
Who is so irreversibly loyal? Like Giannis, would he be the first guy to do it?
Or Jokic? I bet Jokic would.
Yeah, Jokic doesn't get. Well, Jokic can be like, they're going to offer him a whatever. His next contract will be a 5-year deal. He'd be like, I'd rather sign like, 1+1. I'm not sure if I still want to be doing this.
That's right.
Bryan, this was great. We were going to be on pace for under an 80-minute podcast, but I don't think we've yet to record a podcast. Under 90, though. This might be our first sub 90 podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and all the work that you're putting out at these vast amounts of mediums?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter for now, at least at B Toporek, and Blue Sky. I think I'm like hopefully going to just make the transition there full time at some point. And on Threads, if anyone uses that still, I'm there. I'm not posting anything because I don't get it, but I'm there as well. You can find me, as Dan mentioned, the NBA podcast, wherever podcasts are found. I'm at Forbes writing about the Sixers and salary cap stuff, and at Liberty Ballers on SB Nation writing the drip, 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 steady drip, drip, drip of James Harden trade non-updates. So if you like water torture, follow me there as well.
I would like to say I'll only be pestering you once more in the near future when we do the Sixers Outlook, but depending on what happens with the James Harden cycle, that could be a lie. So I won't say it. So just rest assured, I'll be pestering you again. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Of course, anytime, Deb.